I never thought moving to Saguaro Heights would turn me into a neighborhood rebel, but here I was, standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, staring at a bright orange citation taped to my mailbox while my coffee got cold in my hands. Unauthorized window treatment visible from street view. I read aloud, my voice cracking with disbelief. Fine $150, second violation $300, third violation $500 plus lien consideration. My neighbor Janet emerged from her front door like she'd been waiting for this exact moment, her perfectly coiffed silver hair catching the early Arizona sun. She wore a crisp white polo shirt with the Saguaro Heights HOA logo embroidered on the chest, and her smile had all the warmth of a rattlesnake. "Good morning, Rebecca," she called out, her voice carrying that sing-song quality that always made my skin crawl. "I see you received your citation." "Janet, these are just regular curtains," I said, holding up the orange paper. "The same white curtains I've had for 3 years." "Oh, honey, I'm afraid that's not accurate." She pulled out her phone and started swiping through photos. "According to our architectural review committee, those curtains appear beige from the street, and beige is not an approved window treatment color. Only pure white, off-white, or cream are acceptable." I squinted at my windows, then back at her. "Janet, they're white. They've always been white. I understand your confusion, but I've documented several violations over the past month." She turned her phone toward me, showing me a series of photos of my house taken from different angles. "See here. In the afternoon light, they clearly appear beige. And here's one from yesterday evening, definitely not white." The photos were obviously taken with some kind of filter or weird lighting, making my pristine white curtains look yellowish. I felt my blood pressure rising. "This is ridiculous. You're taking photos of my house now." As secretary of the Architectural Review Committee, it's my responsibility to ensure compliance with our community standards. Janet's smile never wavered. "These standards protect all our property values, Rebecca. I'm sure you understand." "What I understand is that you've been harassing me for months," I said, my voice getting louder. "First it was my mailbox being 2 inches too far to the left, then my garden gnome was too tall, and now you're telling me my white curtains aren't white enough. Rebecca, please keep your voice down. We don't want to disturb the neighbors." Janet glanced around conspiratorially. "And speaking of your garden gnome, I notice it's back in your front yard. That's another violation. Garden ornaments over 8 inches tall require prior approval." I looked over at my little ceramic gnome, Harold, who stood all of 10 inches tall next to my mailbox. I'd bought him at a garage sale last month, specifically because the previous owner said the HOA made her get rid of all her garden decorations. "Harold is not bothering anyone," I said. "He's adorable." "Harold," Janet raised an eyebrow. "You named your garden gnome." "What, great, we're sorry. What's wrong with that?" Nothing, dear. It's just, well, it shows a certain attachment that might make this more difficult for you." She made another note on her phone. "I'll need you to remove Harold by 5 p.m. today, or that's another $150 fine." "This is insane," I muttered, but Janet was already walking back toward her house. "Have a wonderful day, Rebecca," she called over her shoulder. "And remember, community compliance is everyone's responsibility." I stood there for another minute staring at the orange citation and feeling like I'd fallen down a rabbit hole into some bureaucratic nightmare. 3 years ago, when my ex-husband Mark and I bought this house, the HOA seemed like a good thing. Maintained common areas, reasonable rules, protection for property values, it all made sense on paper. But Mark had taken off to find himself in Costa Rica 8 months ago, leaving me with the house payments, the HOA fees, and apparently Janet's personal vendetta against my home improvements. I crumpled up the citation and headed inside to get ready for work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. At lunch, I called my sister Lisa from my desk at the accounting firm where I'd worked for the past 12 years. "She's taking pictures of your curtains." Lisa's voice crackled through my phone. "That's creepy, Becca." "It gets worse," I said, unwrapping my sandwich. "I looked up the HOA bylaws last night. According to Section 4.7 Architectural Review Committee, members aren't supposed to initiate violations against properties adjacent to their own unless there's a formal complaint from another resident. Adjacent to their own, does anenom, mean renimenon. Janet lives directly across the street from me. She's been filing these violations herself, which violates the conflict of interest clause. So what are you going to do, Wedemar, when I saw Samaritan? I'm going to the next board meeting," and I said, "Thursday night, I'm going to present the evidence and get this stopped." Good for you. Stand up to the HOA bully. That afternoon, I stopped by my neighbor Tom's house on my way home from work. Tom was probably in his 70s, a retired engineer who'd lived in Saguaro Heights since the development was built 15 years ago. His house was immaculate, his yard perfectly maintained, and he had the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of dealing with bureaucracy. Tom, I need some advice, I said when he answered his door. Let me guess, he said, ushering me into his living room. Janet, Wecky, how did you know? She's been making rounds. Hit up the Petersons last week about their mailbox numbers being the wrong font. Filed a complaint against the Johnsons because their dog barks at 7:30 in the morning. Tom shook his head. The woman's become a menace since she got elected to the architectural committee. I want to challenge these violations at the board meeting, but I don't know the process. You're entitled to dispute any violation within 30 days, Tom said. But here's the thing. Janet's husband, Rick, is the board treasurer, and her best friend, Dolores, is the president. You're going to need more than just pointing out their conflict of interest. What do you mean, I mean, you need to prove they're acting in bad faith. Document everything. Get other neighbors involved. Show a pattern of harassment. Tom walked over to his window and pointed across the street toward Janet's house. See that security camera on her porch? The one pointed directly at your front door, that's new as of last month, right around the time your violation started. I felt a chill run down my spine. She's been watching my house, recording it more likely, building a case. A case for what? That's what you need to find out. Thursday night, I walked into the community center for my first HOA board meeting. The room was set up with folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members sat like judges. Janet sat at the far end, her notebook open and her phone positioned to record. Next to her was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who I assumed was her husband, Rick. At the head of the table sat Dolores, a woman in her 60s with short blonde hair and a permanent scowl. About 15 other residents were scattered throughout the chairs, most of them looking as uncomfortable as I felt. We'll now hear from residents who have requested time to address the board. Dolores announced, consulting a piece of paper. Rebecca Martinez, you have 3 minutes to discuss your architectural violations. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly as I held my prepared notes. Thank you. I'm here to dispute the violations filed against my property at 1247 Desert Bloom Drive. I believe these violations are invalid for several reasons. Proceed, Dolores said curtly. First, the curtains in question are white, not beige, as claimed in the violation. I have receipts showing they were purchased as white curtains 3 years ago, and I have photographs showing they appear white under normal lighting conditions. Janet leaned forward. Mrs. Martinez, the architectural committee conducted multiple site visits and documented the beige appearance of your window treatments under various lighting conditions. Our photographic evidence is quite clear. Which brings me to my second point, I continued. According to Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws, Architectural Committee, members cannot initiate violations against adjacent properties without a formal complaint from another resident. Mrs. Janet Wilson lives directly across from my property, making her initiation of these violations a conflict of interest. The room got very quiet. I saw several neighbors sit up straighter in their chairs. Rick Wilson cleared his throat. The board has reviewed that provision, and we believe Mrs. Wilson's role as secretary of the Architectural Committee supersedes the conflict of interest clause. That's not what the bylaws say, I replied, pulling out a copy. Section 4.7 specifically states that no committee member may initiate violations against adjacent properties, regardless of their position. It's meant to prevent exactly this kind of harassment. Harassment, Janet's voice rose. Mrs. Martinez ensuring compliance with community standards is not harassment. Taking photographs of my house from the street at different times of day to find lighting that makes my white curtains look beige is harassment, I said, my voice getting stronger. Installing a security camera pointed directly at my front door is harassment. Filing 3 separate violations in 2 weeks over minor issues while ignoring identical violations at other properties is harassment. That's enough, Dolores snapped. The board has reviewed the violations and found them valid. Your appeal is denied. Wait, I said. I haven't finished presenting my evidence. Your 3 minutes are up. You said I had 3 minutes to discuss my violations. I've only addressed 1 of the 3 violations. Dolores looked annoyed. Fine, you have 2 more minutes. The second violation is for my garden gnome being over 8 inches tall. The HOA guidelines state that garden ornaments require approval if they're over 12 inches tall, not 8 inches. Mrs. Wilson cited the wrong standard. Janet shuffled through her papers. The guidelines were updated last month to reflect the 8-inch standard. Updated by whom I never received notice of any guideline changes. And according to the bylaws, all residents must be notified 30 days before any rule changes take effect. More silence. I saw Tom in the back row nodding approvingly. The third violation is for my mailbox being incorrectly positioned. Mrs. Wilson claims it's 2 inches too far to the left, but I had it surveyed by a licensed surveyor. I pulled out an official document. This survey shows my mailbox is positioned exactly according to the HOA specifications provided when my house was built 3 years ago. Surveys can be inaccurate, Rick said dismissively. This survey was conducted by Morrison and Associates, the same firm that did the original development survey for Saguaro Heights. I replied, they have the original specifications on file. The board members exchanged glances. I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. Furthermore, I continued, I've documented at least 12 other properties in this community with identical or more severe violations that have not been cited. I have photographs showing garden ornaments over 8 inches tall mailboxes positioned incorrectly and window treatments that clearly violate the color guidelines. None of these properties receive violations. Do you have those photographs with you? Asked board member number 4, an older man I didn't recognize. I do. I pulled out a folder and started spreading photos across the table. Here's 1,423 Desert Bloom with a 14-inch ceramic cactus in their front yard. Here's 1,156 Saguaro Way with a mailbox clearly 6 inches to the right of the standard position. Here's 1,334 Desert Bloom with dark blue curtains visible from the street. The board members leaned forward to examine the photos. Janet's face was getting red. The point is, I said these violations appear to be selectively enforced against my property, while identical violations at other properties are ignored. This suggests personal bias rather than legitimate enforcement of community standards. Are you accusing the Architectural Committee of bias? Dolores asked. I'm presenting evidence that suggests selective enforcement, yes. That's a serious allegation, Rick said. Do you have any proof of personal bias? I have documentation showing that Mrs. Wilson has filed complaints about my property every 2 weeks for the past 3 months, while filing 0 complaints about any other property during the same period, I said. I also have witness statements from neighbors who say Mrs. Wilson has made disparaging comments about my landscaping, my car, and my personal life. What kind of disparaging comments? The 4th board member asked. I took a deep breath. According to Mrs. Peterson at 1251 Desert Bloom, Mrs. Wilson told her that divorced women let their properties go downhill and bring down neighborhood values. According to Mr. Chen at 1243 Desert Bloom, Mrs. Wilson said I was probably struggling financially and would likely end up in foreclosure, making me a bad neighbor to have. The room erupted in murmurs. Janet stood up abruptly. That's a lie, she said. I never said any such thing. Are you willing to put that denial in writing under oath? I asked. Of course I am. Good, because I have recordings. The room went dead silent. Even Dolores looked stunned. Recordings, Rick asked. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, I said. When Mrs. Wilson came to my door last Tuesday to discuss my violations, I recorded our conversation on my phone. During that conversation, she made several statements about my financial situation, my personal life, and her belief that I don't belong in this community. You recorded a private conversation without consent. Janet's voice was shrill. I recorded a conversation in which I was a participant, which is legal in Arizona, I corrected. And since you were standing on my property making accusations about HOA violations, I'd argue it was hardly private. We don't need to hear any recordings, Dolores said quickly. Actually, I think we do, said the 4th board member, who I was starting to like. If there are allegations of bias and personal harassment, the board should hear all relevant evidence. Motion to table this discussion pending legal review, Rick said. Seconded, said Janet. All in favor. Samina Kanan. 3 hands went up, 2 stayed down. Motion carries. Mrs. Martinez, your violations remain in effect pending board review. This meeting is adjourned. I stood there as the board members quickly gathered their papers and headed for the exit. Several neighbors came up to me afterward. That was impressive, Tom said. You've got them rattled. I can't believe Janet said those things about you, said a woman I recognized from down the street. She told me you were probably going to abandon the house and let it become a rental property. She what? She's been telling people you can't afford the house on your own and that divorced women are bad for property values. I thought it was just gossip, but now it sounds like a campaign to force you out, Tom finished. But why would she want to force me out? Tom looked uncomfortable. Have you noticed who's been touring the empty lot next to your house? Yes, sir, there's an empty lot next to my house. The corner lot at Desert Bloom in Saguaro. Been for sale for 2 years. Word is someone made an offer last month. What does that have to do with anything wacky? The buyer is Wilson Development, Rick Wilson's company. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You're saying Janet's husband wants to buy the lot next to my house? I'm saying if you default on your mortgage and the house goes into foreclosure, he could probably get both properties at a significant discount. The pieces started falling into place. The escalating violations, the impossible standards, the selective enforcement. It wasn't about community compliance. It was about driving down my property value and forcing me into financial distress. That's criminal, I said. No, it's business, Tom replied grimly. Unless you can prove conspiracy, which is a lot harder than proving bias. I went home that night feeling defeated and angry. I'd stood up to the board, presented evidence, and made them squirm, but nothing had actually changed. The violations were still in effect, the fines were still accumulating, and Janet was still watching my house from across the street. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back patio, looking out at my small but well-maintained yard. Harold the gnome sat by my back door, having been moved there to avoid the front yard violation. He looked as dejected as I felt. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mrs. Martinez. This is David Chen from 1243 Desert Bloom. We met briefly after the board meeting tonight. Oh yes, hi. I wanted to call because my wife and I have been talking and we think what's happening to you is wrong. We'd like to help. That's very kind, but I'm not sure what anyone can do. Actually, there might be something. My wife May is an attorney. She specializes in real estate law, including HOA disputes. She thinks you might have grounds for a lawsuit. A lawsuit against Janet Wilson personally and possibly against the HOA for allowing discriminatory enforcement. But she'd need to review all your documentation and maybe talk to some other neighbors. Mr. Chen, I can't afford an attorney right now. She's willing to take it on contingency if the case is strong enough. Why don't you come over this weekend and we can discuss it? Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting in the Chen's immaculate living room, sharing tea and spreadsheets with May Chen, who turned out to be a sharp, no-nonsense attorney in her 40s. This is actually quite good documentation, May said, reviewing my folder of photos, citations, and notes. You've done most of the investigative work already. Is it enough for a lawsuit? Do wanna assuring? May reassure it to me. Potentially. The selective enforcement is clear, and if we can establish that the violations were filed in bad faith to cause financial distress, we might have a case for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. What about the conflict of interest with the development company? That's harder to prove without more evidence, but it certainly strengthens the narrative of bad faith. Mamai set down the papers and looked at me seriously. Before we go any further, I need to ask, are you prepared for this to get ugly? HOA lawsuits can drag on for months, and the board will probably retaliate with more violations. They're already retaliating, Mamai said. This morning, I found another citation for having my trash cans visible from the street. I put them out at 6 a.m. for pickup at 7 a.m., and somehow Janet managed to photograph them and file a violation in that 1-hour window. 6 a.m. on a Saturday. Apparently, the trash pickup schedule changed, but only certain residents were notified. May and David exchanged a look. That's not normal HOA behavior, May said. That's targeted harassment. So you'll take the case. I'll take the case. But first I want to do some investigating of my own. Over the next 2 weeks, May worked her magic. She filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, requested all HOA records for the past year, and interviewed 8 different neighbors who had witnessed Janet's behavior. Meanwhile, the violations kept coming. Janet cited me for having a garden hose visible from the street, for parking my car 6 inches too far from the curb, and for having unauthorized plant species in my front flower bed. Apparently, my Arizona wildflowers weren't on the approved plant list that had been updated the week before. Each violation came with escalating fines, and the total was approaching $1, $200. This has to stop, I told May during one of our phone calls. I can't keep paying these fines. Don't pay them, she said. We're going to court. The following Tuesday, May filed a complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court against Janet Wilson, the Saguaro Heights HOA, and Wilson Development for harassment, discriminatory enforcement conspiracy in violation of my rights as a homeowner. The response was immediate. Wednesday morning, I found Janet standing in my driveway at 7 a.m., but this time she wasn't alone. Rick was with her, along with a man in a suit who I didn't recognize. Rebecca, we need to talk, Janet said, but her usual smug confidence was gone. She looked nervous. I don't think we have anything to discuss, I replied, staying in my doorway. This lawsuit is ridiculous, Rick said. We're prepared to offer a reasonable settlement. All violations dismissed, all fines refunded. The man in the suit added, plus $5,000 for your legal expenses. Who are you? I asked. Brad Morrison, attorney for the HOA. Mrs. Martinez, this lawsuit is going to be expensive for everyone involved. We think we can resolve this amicably. What about the development lot, The three of them exchanged glances. What about it? Rick asked. Are you still planning to buy it? My business investments aren't relevant to this HOA dispute. So that's a yes. Mrs. Martinez, Brad said, the settlement offer is contingent on you dropping the lawsuit within 48 hours. After that, we'll fight this in court. I'll discuss it with my attorney. That afternoon, May called with interesting news. I've been digging into Wilson Development's finances, she said. They're leveraged to the hilt. Rick Wilson has been borrowing against anticipated development projects, including several lots in Saguaro Heights, including the one next to my house, including the one next to your house. But here's the interesting part. The bank approval for his construction loan is contingent on acquiring multiple contiguous lots, including yours. Mine isn't for sale. Exactly. Which means if he can't acquire your property, the entire development deal falls apart. He's got about $2 million riding on this. So he really was trying to force me into foreclosure. It looks that way. I've also found 3 other homeowners in similar situations, selective HOA enforcement, followed by offers to buy their properties at below market prices. This is a pattern, de moi. This is a criminal enterprise. I'm forwarding my findings to the Attorney General's office. What about their settlement offer? What settlement offer? I told May about the morning's visit and their proposal. $5,000, May laughed. Rebecca, based on what I've found, you're looking at a settlement in the 6 figures. Don't take their offer. Thursday morning brought another surprise. Tom knocked on my door around 8 a.m., looking excited. Rebecca, you need to see this, he said, holding up his tablet. Check out the neighborhood forum. He showed me a post from someone named SH Resident Anonymous that had been posted at midnight. Fellow Saguaro Heights residents, I've been documenting HOA violations and selective enforcement for the past 6 months. What I found will shock you. The post included a detailed spreadsheet showing every violation filed by the Architectural Committee over the past year. The data was clear. Janet Wilson had filed 47 violations against 12 different properties, but 23 of those violations were against just 3 houses, mine, the Johnsons and a house on Cactus Way that had recently sold at a significant loss. Scroll down, Tom said. The post continued with photos comparing identical violations at different properties, some cited, some ignored. The pattern was obvious. Properties that had been cited were all in areas where Wilson Development had expressed interest in buying additional lots. Who posted this? I asked. That's the beautiful part, Tom said. Look at the metadata on the photos. I squinted at the tiny text. The photos had been taken with the same type of camera Janet used for her violation documentation, and they were time-stamped during hours when only someone with 24/7 access to the community would be able to take them. Someone on the inside, I said. Someone with access to Janet's files and photo records. Friday afternoon, May called with an update. The Attorney General's office is opening an investigation into Wilson Development and the HOA, she said. But more importantly, the HOA board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. They want to discuss your case. Are they dropping the violations? Better than that. They're removing Janet from the Architectural Committee and censuring Rick for conflict of interest. Apparently, the anonymous post on the neighborhood forum caused quite a stir. Who do you think posted it? My money's on Dolores, the board president. She's been getting heat from other residents, and I think she realized Janet and Rick were going to take down the whole board. Saturday evening, I walked into another packed HOA meeting, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The room was buzzing with conversation, and I could see Janet sitting in the front row, looking like she'd been crying. Rick was nowhere to be seen. Dolores called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. The board has conducted a review of recent architectural violations and has determined that several violations were filed in error or without proper justification, she announced. All violations against the property at 1247 Desert Bloom Drive are hereby rescinded and all associated fines are dismissed. A small cheer went up from the residents. Furthermore, Dolores continued, the board has accepted the resignation of Janet Wilson from the Architectural Committee effective immediately. We have also implemented new procedures to prevent conflict of interest situations in the future. Janet stood up abruptly. I have served this community faithfully for 3 years, she said, her voice shaking. The violations I filed were legitimate, and I resent the implication that I acted inappropriately. Mrs. Wilson, Dolores replied firmly, your selective enforcement of community standards and your failure to disclose potential conflicts of interest have damaged this community's trust. Your resignation was the right decision. What about Rick? Someone called out from the back. Rick Wilson has recused himself from all board activities pending the completion of the Attorney General's investigation, Dolores said. The board is committed to transparency and ethical governance. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to congratulate me. Mrs. Peterson apologized for not speaking up sooner about Janet's comments. The Johnsons thanked me for fighting the violations that had been filed against them. Even people I'd never met before stopped to shake my hand. Tom walked me to my car afterward. So what happens now? I asked. Now you enjoy living in a community that actually follows its own rules, he said. And Janet Wilson learns that bullying people has consequences. Do you really think she'll stop? I think she's moving. Word is she and Rick are putting their house on the market. Apparently losing the development deal put them in a difficult financial position. I looked across the street at Janet's house where I could see lights on and what looked like a home office. For 3 months, she'd made my life miserable with her camera and her citations and her smug superiority. Now she was the one facing financial difficulties and community censure. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. Tom, did you ever find out who posted that anonymous forum message? Shuri. He smiled. Funny thing about that. Turns out Janet's been using her HOA email account to send personal messages to Rick about the development deals. All HOA email accounts are backed up to a central server that the property management company maintains. Someone hacked her email. Someone with legitimate access to the backup server might have noticed some interesting patterns in the email archive. Tom said carefully. Hypothetically speaking, do you know who has access to the backup server? Well, as the former IT director for the city of Phoenix, I still have a few contacts in the tech industry, Tom said. And I may have mentioned to the property management company that they should review their data security protocols. I stared at him. Tom, did I? What, I'm just a concerned resident who believes in community transparency, he said innocently. Although I will say that anyone who keeps detailed photographic records of their harassment activities probably shouldn't store those photos in their official HOA email account. Monday morning, I woke up to silence. No Janet lurking in her front yard with her camera. No orange citations taped to my mailbox. No mysterious schedule changes or surprise rule updates. I made my coffee and walked out to get my newspaper, and for the first time in months, I actually enjoyed standing in my own driveway. Harold the gnome was back in his spot by the mailbox, all 10 inches of him, and my white curtains were hanging peacefully in my windows. My trash cans were sitting exactly where they were supposed to be, and my Arizona wildflowers were blooming beautifully in the morning sun. A few weeks later, May called with the final settlement numbers. The HOA agreed to pay $15,000 in damages plus all your legal fees, she said. Wilson Development settled separately for another $25,000 to avoid the conspiracy charges. That seems like a lot of money. It's appropriate compensation for 3 months of harassment and emotional distress. Plus, it sends a message to other HOA boards that this kind of behavior has real consequences. What happened to the development deal? Fell through when Rick couldn't secure financing without your lot. He ended up defaulting on several other projects. Janet filed for divorce last week. I felt a pang of something not quite sympathy, but awareness that Janet's life had imploded just as dramatically as she tried to implode mine. Do you think I should have taken their original settlement offer? I asked. $5,000 to let them continue harassing you and potentially defrauding other neighbors? No, you did the right thing. That evening, I was watering my wildflowers when David Chen walked over from across the street. Rebecca May wanted me to give you this, he said, handing me an envelope. It's the final paperwork from the settlement, but she also wanted to tell you about something else. What's that, Weiser? The Attorney General's investigation found evidence of similar schemes in 3 other HOA communities. Your case is being used as a model for new legislation to protect homeowners from discriminatory enforcement. Really, really, you didn't just solve your own problem, you helped solve it for a lot of other people. I opened the envelope and found the settlement check along with a handwritten note from May. Thanks for having the courage to fight back. The community is stronger because of people like you. 6 months later, I was elected to the HOA board as the new architectural committee chair. My first act was to establish clear written procedures for violation enforcement, including mandatory documentation appeal processes and conflict of interest disclosures. My second act was to approve a community garden project on the empty lot that Wilson Development had tried to buy. The lot's new owner, a retired teacher from Minnesota, was delighted to let the community use it for growing vegetables and native plants. Janet and Rick Wilson moved to a rental house in a different part of the city. I heard through the neighborhood goss grapevine that Rick was working as a project manager for someone else's development company, and Janet had gotten a job at a retail store. I ran into her once at the grocery store, and we both pretended not to see each other. Tom became the HOA treasurer and implemented new financial oversight procedures that ensured board members could never again use their positions for personal gain. He also upgraded our community security system to include cameras that monitor common areas, but explicitly not individual properties. The Johnsons, who had been facing violations for their dog's morning barking, adopted a second dog and now run a neighborhood dog walking service. Mrs. Peterson planted a garden full of ceramic animals, including a 12-inch ceramic roadrunner that Janet would have had a fit about. The Chens organize monthly community barbecues that have become the highlight of neighborhood social life. Harold the Gnome is still standing proudly by my mailbox now, joined by a small ceramic cactus that someone left as a gift after the settlement was announced. My white curtains are still white, my wildflowers are still blooming, and my trash cans go out every Tuesday morning without incident. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just protect you. It protects everyone around you who was too afraid or too isolated to fight back on their own. The HOA still sends out monthly newsletters about community standards and architectural guidelines, but now they include a section on homeowner rights and appeal procedures. Every new resident gets a packet explaining how to report discriminatory enforcement and what resources are available if they face harassment. We're not a perfect community, but we're a more honest one, and that's worth more than any settlement check. Last month, a new family moved into the house next door, a young couple with 2 small children and a golden retriever named Max. I introduced myself the day they moved in and gave them my phone number in case they had any questions about community rules or procedures. Is there anything we should know about the HOA? The husband asked. We've heard horror stories from friends who live in other developments. Just follow the guidelines, be respectful of your neighbors, and don't be afraid to speak up if something seems unfair. I told him, this community protects people who stand up for themselves. That evening, I sat on my back patio with a glass of wine, listening to the sound of children playing in the yard next door and watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of pink and orange. Harold the Gnome kept watch over the front yard. My wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze and my white curtains caught the last light of day. It had been a long, difficult fight, but in the end, I'd won more than just the right to keep my garden gnome and hang my curtains. I'd won the right to live in peace in my own home, surrounded by neighbors who looked out for each other instead of looking for reasons to tear each other down. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that happen in your own backyard, and sometimes the most important victories are the ones that make your community a little bit better for everyone who comes after you. This is a dramatized story inspired by common HOA disputes, not legal advice.